The federal courthouse stood tall and imposing against the clear blue sky, its stone steps leading up to massive wooden doors that seemed to swallow visitors whole. Among the crowd of sharp suits and confident strides, one woman stuck out like a wildflower in a formal garden. Mary Chen clutched her worn canvas bag tightly against her faded denim jacket. Her simple ponytail and minimal makeup contrasted sharply with the polished appearance of the attorneys rushing past her. At 42, the small-town librarian had never imagined she'd find herself here, about to face off against Stone Ridge Developments, a corporation worth millions that had set its sights on her family's land. As she passed through security, Mary fumbled with her papers, dropping several that scattered across the marble floor. A few young lawyers in expensive suits snickered as she knelt to gather them. "Looks like someone should have hired actual representation," one whispered loudly enough for Mary to hear. Her cheeks burned as she collected her documents, but she straightened her shoulders and continued toward courtroom 3. The land had been in her family for 3 generations. Her grandfather had built the modest farmhouse with his own hands, and her grandmother had planted the apple orchard that still produced fruit each fall. No amount of intimidation would make her give it up without a fight. Inside the courtroom, the difference between the two parties couldn't have been more obvious. On one side sat 5 attorneys from Stone Ridge, each with matching leather portfolios and tablets displaying digital copies of their meticulously prepared arguments. Their lead counsel, a man with silver hair and a watch that probably cost more than Mary's car, seemed completely at ease as he chatted with his colleagues. Mary sat alone at the other table, arranging her handwritten notes and photocopied land records. She'd spent weeks in the county archives researching the property boundaries and easement rights that the company claimed gave them access to their land. When the bailiff called for everyone to rise, Mary knocked over her water cup, sending a small puddle across her papers. The corporate legal team exchanged knowing glances and barely hidden smiles. Case number 47,293, Stone Ridge Developments versus Chen, announced the judge, a stern-looking woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, regarding disputed property access and development rights. The lead attorney for Stone Ridge stood smoothly. "Jonathan Blackwell representing the plaintiff, Your Honor. We have our full team present and ready to proceed." When Mary's turn came, she stood nervously, her voice barely audible. "Mary Chen, Your Honor. I'm representing myself." The judge peered over her glasses with obvious skepticism. "Ms. Chen, are you certain you wish to proceed without legal counsel? This is a complex case involving significant property rights. The court would strongly advise you to seek proper representation." From the corner of her eye, Mary could see Mr. Blackwell's satisfied expression. He clearly expected her to crumble under pressure. "I understand, Your Honor," Mary replied, her voice growing slightly stronger. "But I know this land better than anyone. I've lived there my whole life." The judge sighed. "Very well, but I must warn you that this court cannot offer special treatment because you've chosen to represent yourself. The same rules and procedures apply to all parties." As the preliminary hearing proceeded, the corporate attorney outlined their case with practiced ease. Stone Ridge Developments has clear documentation showing a historical access easement through the defendant's property. Ms. Chen's refusal to acknowledge these legal rights has delayed an important development project that would bring jobs and economic growth to the community. While he spoke, 2 junior attorneys passed notes to each other, one rolling his eyes when Mary pulled out hand-drawn maps of her property. When her turn came to respond, Mary's hands trembled slightly as she stood. A folder slipped from her grasp, spilling more papers. Laughter from the corporate table was quickly silenced by the judge's sharp glare. "Take your time, Ms. Chen," the judge said, her tone softening just slightly. Mary took a deep breath and began explaining her position in simple terms. No one in the courtroom suspected that beneath her nervous exterior and simple appearance lay an extraordinary mind and a secret that would soon turn this seemingly one-sided battle completely upside down. The trial officially began 3 days later. Mary arrived early, wearing the same denim jacket but with a slightly more pressed blouse underneath. She had spent every waking hour since the preliminary hearing preparing, her kitchen table covered with legal books borrowed from the public library where she worked. As she set up her materials, the Stone Ridge legal team filed in, their confidence even more apparent than before. The lead attorney, Mr. Blackwell, barely acknowledged her presence as he arranged his expensive fountain pen perfectly parallel to his leather portfolio. "I see Ms. Chen is still proceeding without counsel," he remarked loudly to his colleagues. "This should be mercifully quick." The courtroom filled with spectators, mostly locals curious about the woman brave enough or foolish enough to face Stone Ridge alone. Mary felt their eyes on her back, but focused on organizing her notes. When the judge entered, proceedings began with opening statements. Mr. Blackwell delivered his with theatrical precision, using terms like prescriptive easement and adverse possession, while glancing at Mary with thinly veiled amusement, clearly expecting these phrases to confuse her. When Mary's turn came, she approached the podium with quiet determination. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her voice came out clearer than before. "Your Honor, I may not have fancy words or expensive suits, but I have truth on my side," she began. A few people in the audience exchanged sympathetic glances, already feeling sorry for her. The first witness called was Stone Ridge's land surveyor, who presented complicated maps and technical jargon about property boundaries. During cross-examination, Mr. Blackwell smirked as Mary approached the witness. "Ms. Chen, do you have questions for our expert?" he asked patronizingly. "Perhaps I could explain some of the terminology first." The courtroom grew quiet, everyone expecting Mary to fumble. Instead, she looked directly at the surveyor. "Your survey indicates a Class B easement established in 1974, correct?" she asked calmly. "Yes, that's right," the surveyor replied, slightly surprised by her precise question. "And are you aware that under Henderson v. Western Properties, a Class B designation requires continuous documented use for 15 years, which your own exhibits fail to establish?" The surveyor blinked rapidly. "Well, furthermore," Mary continued, her voice growing stronger, "your measurement from the creek boundary uses the high water mark method, which was specifically overturned in the Thompson-Watershed cases of 2012. A murmur swept through the courtroom. The corporate attorneys exchanged concerned glances as Mary continued dissecting the survey with precise legal references. Mr. Blackwell stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant clearly has received coaching from someone with legal knowledge." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Is that your objection, counselor? That Ms. Chen appears to understand the law?" "Your Honor," Mary said quietly, "I haven't received coaching." She reached into her worn canvas bag and pulled out a document, handing it to the bailiff who delivered it to the judge. "What I do have is a law degree from Yale, class of 2006, where I graduated third in my class. Before moving back to care for my mother, I worked for 5 years at Walker & Associates in Boston." The judge examined the document, eyebrows rising. "Ms. Chen's credentials appear to be in order, Mr. Blackwell." The corporate attorney's face flushed red. The junior lawyers behind him froze, one still holding a note that clearly mocked Mary's appearance. "But you're a librarian," stuttered Mr. Blackwell. "Yes," Mary replied simply. "After my mother's stroke, I moved home to care for her. The local library needed help, and I found I loved the work more than corporate law. But I never surrendered my law license." The judge actually smiled slightly. "Well then, let's continue. Though I suggest the plaintiff's team might want to reconsider their strategy." As Mary returned to her table, she caught the eye of an elderly man in the audience, the town's former mayor, who gave her a supple thumbs up. The atmosphere in the courtroom had completely transformed. The once confident corporate team now hurriedly whispered among themselves, frantically reorganizing their approach. The battle had only just begun, but for the first time, everyone present realized it would be anything but mercifully quick. The news spread quickly through the small town. By the following morning, the courtroom was packed with spectators eager to witness the showdown between Mary Chen and Stone Ridge Developments. The corporate legal team arrived with noticeably less swagger, having clearly spent the night regrouping. Mr. Blackwell had added 2 more attorneys to his team. Their table now overflowed with binders and laptops, a stark contrast to Mary's modest setup. But something had changed in how people looked at her. The pitying glances were gone, replaced by curious, hopeful expressions. "All rise," called the bailiff as the judge entered. "Today, Stone Ridge would present their core argument centered around a stack of property documents and land use regulations that they believed would give them rights to Mary's family land. Their strategy was clear: overwhelm with technicalities and volume. "Your Honor," began Mr. Blackwell, "we've prepared a comprehensive analysis of 37 similar cases where easement rights were established through historical precedent." He gestured to his colleagues, who wheeled in a cart loaded with bound legal volumes. Mary watched calmly, making occasional notes on her yellow legal pad. When one of the junior attorneys placed a massive binder on her table with a thud, she simply opened it and began reviewing its contents. For 2 hours, Stone Ridge presented a dizzying array of legal arguments. They cited obscure statutes and complex zoning regulations, frequently using terminology that would confuse most non-lawyers. Occasionally, Mr. Blackwell would glance at Mary, seemingly checking if she was getting lost in the legal maze they were constructing. When it came time for Mary to respond, she approached the front of the courtroom without notes. The spectators leaned forward in anticipation. "Your Honor," she began, "Stone Ridge has presented an impressive volume of information, but quantity isn't quality." She smiled slightly. "I'd like to address their arguments one by one." What followed astonished everyone. Mary systematically dismantled each of Stone Ridge's points, revealing flaws in their reasoning and misapplications of the cited precedents. She spoke in clear, straightforward language that even the non-lawyers in the audience could follow. "In the Mills versus Oakwood case they referenced," she explained, pointing to a document displayed on the courtroom screen, "the easement was granted because of proven historical use dating back to 1932. But if you look at page 17 of their own evidence," she flipped confidently through the massive binder they had provided, "their survey only claims usage from 1987, far short of the required time period." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Mr. Blackwell's face tightened. Furthermore, Mary continued, "Stone Ridge has presented these property records as definitive. But they've omitted a crucial detail." She pulled a document from her canvas bag. "This county flood record from 1973 clearly shows that the original boundary markers they're relying on were washed away and reset. The new markers were placed 12 feet east of their original position." The judge frowned, examining the document Mary provided. "Mr. Blackwell, were you aware of this flood record?" The attorney hesitated just long enough to answer the question without speaking. Several spectators exchanged knowing looks. As the day progressed, Mary continued finding holes in Stone Ridge's case. When they attempted to introduce surprise evidence, aerial photographs supposedly showing historical use of the contested path, Mary was ready. "Your Honor, these photographs have clearly been enhanced," she noted, pointing to inconsistencies in the shadows. "I request the court examine the original negatives, not these digital versions." The judge agreed, and the corporate team's frustration became increasingly visible. Their strategy of overwhelming Mary with volume had backfired. She was methodically working through each argument, revealing weaknesses that might have otherwise gone unnoticed. During the afternoon break, Mary overheard 2 locals discussing the case. "Can you believe it?" one whispered. They thought she was just some simple country woman they could push around. "Guess they picked the wrong librarian to mess with," the other replied with a grin. When court resumed, something unexpected happened. A small group of elderly residents had arrived, each carrying old leather-bound books. "What's this?" the judge asked as they approached Mary. "Town historians, Your Honor," Mary explained. "They've brought the original land grant records from 1879. Records that show something very interesting about the property line Stone Ridge is disputing." Mr. Blackwell jumped to his feet. "Objection, this is completely improper." But the judge was already examining one of the ancient books with interest. The David versus Goliath battle had just taken another dramatic turn, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. The 4th day of the trial began with an electricity in the air. Word had spread beyond the small town, and reporters from the county newspaper now sat in the back row, scribbling notes. Stone Ridge executives occupied the first row behind their legal team, their expressions grim. "Before we continue," the judge announced, "I've reviewed the historical land grant records presented yesterday. They will be admitted as evidence." She nodded toward Mary. "Ms. Chen, you may proceed with your argument." Mary stood looking more confident than ever in a simple navy blouse. "Thank you, Your Honor. With the court's permission, I'd like to call my first witness." Everyone watched as an elderly man with a weathered face and plaid shirt made his way slowly to the witness stand. This was Tom Wilson, who had lived in the town for all of his 82 years. After he was sworn in, Mary approached him with a gentle smile. "Mr. Wilson, how long has your family owned property neighboring mine?" "Since 1915, he replied in a strong voice that belied his age. "And in all that time, has Stone Ridge or any previous owner ever used the pathway they're now claiming rights to?" Mr. Wilson shook his head firmly. "Never, not once in all my years. That path was created by your grandfather to reach his back fields. Nobody else ever used it until these developers showed up 2 years ago." Mary thanked him and returned to her table. Mr. Blackwell approached for cross-examination, his manner noticeably less arrogant than before. "Mr. Wilson," he began, "at your age, memory can be—" "My age?" Mr. Wilson interrupted, sitting up straighter. "Young man, I can tell you what the weather was like on June 12, 1965. It was sunny with a light breeze from the northwest. I remember because that's the day my daughter was born, and I was worried about storms affecting the hospital trip." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Mr. Blackwell cleared his throat and quickly concluded his questions. As the day progressed, Mary called 4 more longtime residents who each confirmed the same facts. The path had never been a public access route, and Stone Ridge's claims were simply untrue. After the witness testimonies, Mary revealed her most damaging discovery yet. "Your Honor, I spent considerable time researching Stone Ridge's development practices. What I found was troubling." She approached with a thick folder. "This contains documented evidence of a pattern. Stone Ridge has targeted at least 7 other rural properties in 3 counties, all owned by elderly individuals or families without resources to fight back." Murmurs filled the courtroom. The Stone Ridge executives shifted uncomfortably. In each case, Mary continued, pulling out color-coded maps. They used nearly identical tactics, claiming historical easements that didn't exist, pressuring owners with threats of expensive legal battles, and eventually acquiring valuable land for a fraction of its worth. The judge examined the documents with a deepening frown. "Mr. Blackwell, would you care to respond to these allegations?" The corporate attorney seemed genuinely caught off guard. "Your Honor, these other properties have no bearing on the current case. We're simply discussing established legal rights to an access route." Mary shook her head. "With respect, Your Honor, it establishes a clear pattern of predatory behavior. And there's more." She withdrew another document from her canvas bag. "This internal Stone Ridge memo discusses their strategy specifically for my property." She began reading aloud. "The Chen property sits at a crucial junction for our development plans. Initial resistance is expected but unlikely to persist given owners' limited resources and lack of legal expertise. Recommend standard procedure, claim historical easement, initiate legal action, pressure for quick settlement." The courtroom fell completely silent. One of the junior attorneys on the Stone Ridge team stared at his shoes, clearly uncomfortable. "Where did you obtain this document?" the judge asked sharply. "It was provided to me by a former Stone Ridge employee who left the company over ethical concerns," Mary replied. "They've signed an affidavit confirming its authenticity, which I've included." During the afternoon recess, Mary noticed the whispered conversations and pointing from people in the courthouse hallway. A young woman approached her timidly. "Excuse me, Miss Chen. I'm Lisa from the next county over. They took my grandparents' farm last year using the same tactics." Her eyes welled with tears. "We couldn't afford to fight them. Is there really a chance you can win this?" Mary squeezed the woman's hand. "I'm going to try my very best," she promised. When court resumed, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. The Stone Ridge team now huddled together, frantically whispering. Their lead executives had disappeared from the spectator seats. The David versus Goliath battle had evolved into something much bigger, a fight for justice that extended far beyond one woman's property. The 5th day of the trial brought a surprising development. As Mary entered the courthouse, whispers spread through the growing crowd. Stone Ridge had brought in reinforcements, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and an aura of authority that commanded attention the moment he walked in. "Who's that?" Someone whispered behind Mary. "That's Robert Henderson," came the reply. big shot lawyer from the city. They said he charges more per hour than most people make in a week. Mary felt a flutter of nervousness as she watched Mr. Henderson arrange his materials with practiced efficiency. Unlike the other attorneys, he didn't smirk or look down on her. His expression was one of calculated assessment, like a chess player studying his opponent. When the judge entered, Mr. Blackwell stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to introduce co-counsel to our team. Mr. Robert Henderson will be leading our arguments today." The judge nodded. "Welcome, Mr. Henderson. I hope you've been fully briefed on the proceedings thus far." "Thank you, Your Honor," Henderson replied in a deep, resonant voice. "I have indeed." As the day's session began, it became clear why Stone Ridge had brought in their legal heavyweight. Henderson presented their case with a polish and precision that made their previous arguments seem amateurish by comparison. He avoided the condescending tone that had characterized earlier proceedings, instead treating the case, and Mary, with professional respect. "While my colleagues have focused on easement rights," Henderson explained smoothly, "I'd like to redirect the court's attention to the county zoning regulations of 1998, specifically Section 17, which addresses rural property access for planned developments." He proceeded to outline a completely new legal angle, citing obscure but relevant precedents that even Mary hadn't anticipated. The spectators watched with growing concern. For the first time since Mary had revealed her legal background, Stone Ridge seemed to be regaining the upper hand. During a brief recess, Mary paced the hallway, her mind racing. Henderson's arguments were technically sound and would be difficult to counter. As she reviewed her notes, she overheard two spectators talking. "Looks like they finally found someone who can match her," one said. "Poor thing," the other replied. "All that fight just to lose to the big guns in the end." Mary's shoulders tensed, but she kept walking. When court resumed, Henderson continued his methodical dismantling of her case, point by point. His approach was respectful but relentless. When he finally concluded, the courtroom was silent, the mood somber. "Ms. Chen," the judge said, "your response." Mary stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye upon her. For a moment, she simply looked at Henderson, who returned her gaze with professional curiosity. "Mr. Henderson," she began, "your argument was impressively constructed. I particularly appreciated your citation of the Millbrook Watershed case." She paused. "That was one of my professor's favorite teaching examples at Yale." Henderson raised an eyebrow slightly. "In fact," Mary continued, "I believe you once guest lectured in his class. Environmental Law, spring semester 2004. You probably don't remember, but I asked you a question about riparian rights that day." A flicker of recognition crossed Henderson's face. "I remembered your lecture vividly," Mary said, "especially your conclusion that, and I quote, environmental law must protect the vulnerable from those who would exploit legal technicalities to seize natural resources." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Henderson's expression remained unchanged, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Your Honor," Mary continued, turning to the judge, "Mr. Henderson has masterfully cited Section 17 of the county zoning regulations. However, he has omitted one crucial detail." She pulled out another document from her bag. Section 17 was amended in 2011. The amendment, which I've highlighted here, specifically protects family farms and historical properties from precisely the type of access claims Stone Ridge is making. She handed the document to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Furthermore, Mr. Henderson cited the Millbrook case, but failed to mention that it was overturned on appeal. Henderson's composure cracked, just slightly. He glanced at his junior colleagues, who looked back blankly. "It seems," Mary said softly, "that someone neglected to provide Mr. Henderson with the complete case history." The judge studied the document, then looked up at Henderson. "Counselor, are you aware of this amendment?" Henderson cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I was briefed on the relevant statutes by my colleagues. If there's been an oversight—" "An oversight?" Mary interrupted, her voice stronger now. "Like the oversight of targeting elderly property owners? Or the oversight of falsifying historical easement claims? Mr. Henderson, you built your reputation on environmental protection cases. Does your firm know that Stone Ridge has violated watershed protection statutes on 3 of their previous developments?" Henderson turned to look at the Stone Ridge executives, who suddenly found great interest in their shoes. "I wonder," Mary concluded, "if you've been fully briefed on exactly what kind of case you've been brought in to rescue." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge called for order, but even she couldn't entirely hide her surprise at this unexpected turning point in what had already been a remarkable trial. The sixth day of the trial began with a tangible tension in the air. Overnight, the case had transformed from a local property dispute into something much bigger. The courtroom was now completely full, with people standing along the back wall. A television news crew waited outside, barred from filming inside but eager to catch reactions afterward. Stone Ridge's legal team had rearranged themselves. Mr. Henderson now sat front and center, with Mr. Blackwell noticeably relegated to the side. The Stone Ridge CEO had finally appeared, a stern-faced woman in an expensive suit who whispered constantly to her attorneys. When the judge called the court to order, she addressed both parties with a serious expression. "Before we continue, I want to acknowledge that this case has expanded beyond its original scope. Ms. Chen has raised serious allegations about Stone Ridge's business practices. While not all of these allegations may be directly relevant to the property dispute before us, they do raise questions about the credibility of evidence presented." She turned to the Stone Ridge team. "Mr. Henderson, how does your client wish to proceed?" Henderson stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor, after consultation with my clients, we would like to request a brief continuance to review certain documents and prepare an appropriate response." The judge shook her head. "Request denied, Counselor. This trial has already been extended well beyond its original schedule. You may have until after lunch to prepare, but we will continue today." Mary watched this exchange quietly, organizing her notes with steady hands. When court resumed after lunch, Henderson approached the podium with renewed confidence. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge some administrative oversights in our documentation, we categorically deny any pattern of predatory practices. The internal memo Ms. Chen presented yesterday was written by a junior employee who no longer works for Stone Ridge and does not reflect company policy." He gestured towards several thick binders his team had assembled during the break. "We have prepared comprehensive documentation showing that all previous property acquisitions were conducted legally and ethically." Mary listened attentively, making occasional notes. When Henderson finished, she stood to respond. "Your Honor, may I approach?" The judge nodded, and Mary walked forward with a USB drive in hand. "Yesterday evening, after Mr. Henderson's surprise appearance, I received an email from someone at his own law firm." She handed the drive to the bailiff. "This contains environmental impact studies that Stone Ridge commissioned but then buried when the results didn't favor their development plans." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Henderson's expression darkened. "Furthermore," Mary continued, "it contains signed statements from 2 former Stone Ridge employees confirming that the company routinely falsifies documentation to pressure property owners." She turned to Henderson. "It seems someone at your firm has ethical concerns about this case." The judge examined the new evidence with growing concern. "Mr. Henderson, were you aware of these documents?" Before he could answer, the Stone Ridge CEO stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. These allegations are completely unfounded and potentially libelous." "I insist that—" "Please sit down," the judge interrupted firmly. "Unless you've been sworn in as a witness, you have no standing to address this court." The woman sank back into her seat, her face flushed with anger. Henderson looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Your Honor," Mary said, "I'd like to draw the court's attention to one document in particular." She pointed to a file displayed on the courtroom screen. "This environmental study clearly shows that Stone Ridge's proposed development would contaminate the groundwater supply for not just my property, but for a dozen neighboring farms." She clicked to another document. "And here is their application to the County Planning Commission, which states, and I quote, 'no significant environmental impact anticipated.'" Mary looked directly at Henderson. "This isn't just about my land anymore. This is about protecting an entire community's water supply." One of the junior attorneys on the Stone Ridge team suddenly stood and walked out of the courtroom, ignoring Henderson's surprised glance. The message was clear. Not everyone was comfortable with what was being revealed. The judge studied the documents carefully, then looked up at Henderson. "Counselor, these discrepancies are deeply troubling. Do you have an explanation?" Henderson hesitated, clearly caught between his professional ethics and his client's expectations. The CEO was glaring at him, while the remaining attorneys looked increasingly desperate. The once mighty corporation now seemed cornered by a simple librarian who had refused to be intimidated. "Your Honor," Henderson finally said, "I would like to request a brief recess to confer with my clients." The judge nodded. 15 minutes, Mr. Henderson. And when we return, I expect answers, not delays." As the court emptied for the break, Mary remained seated, calmly reviewing her notes. A reporter managed to slip in and approach her table. "Ms. Chen, how does it feel to be winning against such a powerful opponent?" Mary looked up with a small smile. "It's not about winning. It's about doing what's right." The final day of the trial arrived with an atmosphere of anticipation that spread well beyond the courthouse walls. A crowd had gathered outside, mostly locals, but also people from neighboring counties who had heard about the remarkable case. Inside, every seat was filled, with people cramped shoulder to shoulder along the back wall. When Mary entered, several people nodded encouragingly. She no longer looked out of place or intimidated by the grand surroundings. Though still dressed simply in a modest blue dress, she carried herself with quiet confidence as she arranged her materials at her table. The Stone Ridge team arrived looking noticeably different. Their numbers had dwindled. Only Mr. Henderson, Mr. Blackwell, and one junior attorney remained. Gone was the arrogance that had marked their earlier appearances. The CEO was conspicuously absent. "All rise," called the bailiff as the judge entered. Once everyone was seated, the judge addressed the court. "Before we proceed with closing arguments, I understand Stone Ridge has a statement to make, Mr. Henderson." Henderson stood, straightening his tie. The courtroom fell completely silent. "Your Honor, after extensive consultation with my clients, Stone Ridge Developments wishes to withdraw their claim against Ms. Chen's property." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom, followed by excited whispers. The judge called for order before Henderson continued. "Furthermore, Stone Ridge acknowledges certain irregularities in their documentation and processes. They have authorized me to inform the court that they will be conducting a comprehensive review of all their current and past property acquisitions." Mary sat perfectly still, her expression calm but her eyes alert. In addition, Henderson continued, his voice slightly strained, "Stone Ridge will be establishing a fund to address potential environmental concerns related to their existing developments and to provide compensation for any property owners who believe they were treated unfairly in previous dealings." The buzz in the courtroom grew louder. The judge again called for quiet. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "while the court acknowledges your client's change in position, this case has raised serious concerns that go beyond a simple property dispute. The evidence presented by Ms. Chen suggests potential fraud, falsification of documents, and environmental violations. These are matters that may require further investigation by appropriate authorities." Henderson nodded stiffly. "We understand, Your Honor. Stone Ridge is committed to cooperating fully with any such investigations." The judge turned to Mary. "Ms. Chen, do you have any response to Stone Ridge's withdrawal?" Mary stood slowly. For a moment, she looked around the packed courtroom. At the neighbors who had supported her, at the reporters scribbling notes, at the Stone Ridge attorneys who had once mocked her. "Your Honor, I accept Stone Ridge's withdrawal of their claim. However, I believe the issues uncovered during this trial demand more than just a private fund controlled by the same company that caused the problems." She lifted a document from her table. "I've prepared a formal request for the court to refer this matter to the State Environmental Protection Agency and the Attorney General's Office for investigation. The people whose land and water have been affected deserve a truly independent review." The judge nodded approvingly. "The court will take that request under advisement. Given the evidence presented, I'm inclined to grant it." She then addressed the entire courtroom. "This case began as a simple property dispute but has revealed matters of significant public interest. The court will issue a formal ruling on Ms. Chen's property rights and her request for further investigation. For now, this proceeding is adjourned." The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and the courtroom erupted in applause and conversation. Mary gathered her papers calmly, accepting handshakes and thanks from people who pushed forward to speak with her. Outside the courthouse, a much larger crowd had gathered, including television crews. As Mary emerged into the sunlight, a reporter thrust a microphone toward her. "Ms. Chen, you've just won against one of the biggest development corporations in the state. How did you do it?" Mary smiled gently. "By remembering something important, that the law, when properly applied, should protect everyone equally, not just those with power and money." Another reporter called out, "What's next for you? Will you go back to being just a librarian?" Mary looked thoughtful for a moment. "There's no such thing as just a librarian. Libraries are where I first learned about law, about history, about how to research and find truth. That knowledge helped me stand up to Stone Ridge, and it can help others too." She glanced back at the courthouse. "Several people have already asked me to help with similar cases. I might open a small practice, focusing on helping regular folks stand up to corporate bullying." As she walked down the courthouse steps, an elderly woman approached with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "They took my sister's farm last year. We didn't know how to fight back." Mary squeezed her hand. "Well, now we do." The crowd parted respectfully as Mary made her way to her old car. Inside, she took a deep breath and smiled to herself. The journey had begun with mockery in a courtroom, but it had ended with something powerful, hope for an entire community, and a reminder that sometimes justice really does prevail.